Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. I'm Jeff's assistant, Ella. And today, Jeff is going into Mercury Retrograde. I'm seeing this show as kind of like a year's end special because Mercury is stationing today and is about to go retrograde tomorrow. So Jeff is going to go into it in a very, very special way. Aren't you, Jeff?
I hope so.
Yeah, I know so. And we also had a very timely question come through about Mercury retrograde. So whenever you're ready for the question, you'll let me know. And but please.
Sure. Okay. Well, yeah, let's talk about Mercury retrograde. Mercury retrograde is, I think, probably one of the most known things in astrology. I mean, everyone who doesn't even know astrology talks about Mercury retrograde. I mean, I talk to attorneys and even doctors and people who just normally wouldn't be into astrology. They all know about Mercury retrograde, right?
Sure
and
do.
It gets its infamous, kind of, you could say energy because it does tend to disrupt normal things. And, Mercury rules communications. It rules computers. It rules logic. It rules mechanics. It rules just a general flow of information. And I don't think anything could be more important than that today than that whole element. I mean, the whole world is the internet, computers, more than ever before, and communications. So it's really a big deal. Now, when Mercury goes retrograde, it actually does this 3 times a year. It's been doing it since the beginning of time, and it will continue to do it unless they rearrange the solar system. And if that happens, folks, we're going to have more problems.
Hold on tight if that one happens.
Hold on real tight. So, yeah, Mercury does a really cool sacred geometrical dance as it goes along. And there's 2 camps of astrologers. There's the sidereal, which I'm one of those, and also the tropical, which I'm one of those too. So kind of like a split personality. So the bottom line is we really have to look at which system you're going to use. So I'm going to speak to both of those today because I actually look at both of those and I find they're both accurate, which is an enigma. And not to make a confusing subject more, we'll just kind of keep this simple to the astronomy or the astronomical way that Mercury does what it does. And again, that's what I always liked about ancient astrology is it's really, truly astronomy. Because when, we look at the model of astronomy, there's no way any of the planets go backwards. They all rotate around the sun in their orbital patterns. But we do not live on the sun. We live on the earth. So for those who are astronomers, I'm speaking of what we call geocentric astrology. Geocentric just simply means it's earth-based. And again, we don't live on the sun. That might be hard to do. So here's the point. When Mercury goes retrograde, it starts heading backwards to Earth's perspective. And it's what we call the Occidental phase. And if you think the oil companies aren't into it, there's actually an oil company called Occidental Petroleum. So Occidental means that it sets after the sun. So it's all about sunrise and sunset. So when it goes retrograde, that's what we call the Occidental phase up until it joins the sun. That's called the combust phase. And then after that, it goes into what we call its Oriental phase. Now, that's the astronomy. But what does it mean to us in plain English here on Earth? And I can tell you the most confusing time, not always, but generally, is the Occidental phase when Mercury first goes retrograde into its conjunction with the sun from Earth's perspective. And I'd like to take a second and just show you the mechanics of the astronomy because it's kind of interesting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen. So here's the chart. You can see up here at the top, we have the sun, that's Venus, that's Mercury, and there's Pluto. So I'm going to circle Mercury so you can see. Now, this is the tropical zodiac. Now, and it'll apply the same for the sidereal. So notice it is elongated from the sun, maybe just about, probably about 20, about 18 to 19 degrees, something like that, give or take. So here's the point, though, that it sets after the sun. So if we rotate the sun, this is the eastern-western horizon, this big, thick dashed line here. So sunrise is here, that's noon, this is sunset, and over here is midnight, see? These are the 4 points known as sunrise or the ascendant, the midheaven, which is noon, and the descendant, and of course the IC. Little astronomy, astrology lesson here. And of course the earth you could look at as in the middle. So here's what's important. I put the sun up here just for this demonstration. So as Mercury goes retrograde, you're going to notice a little RX next to it. And you can see up here at the very far right, that's today's date that we're actually filming this, not exactly the time, but the date. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go forward I'll go forward in hourly increments. So you can see the sun goes around the chart, sunrise and noon, sunset, right? So the Mercury retrograde goes backwards tomorrow night or the 29th, whenever this airs, the 29th at about 2-something a.m. That's Pacific Standard Time. So if you live on the East Coast or different places of the world, you have to extrapolate. But right around 2:32 a.m. Pacific Coast Time is when it's going to go retrograde. So watch what happens. You can see there's a little S right there. The S simply means it's stationing and getting ready to stop from Earth's perspective. Now, if I keep going, what you're going to notice is in just another hour or two, like right around the 2:30 a.m. in the morning on the 30th, the S will go from S to retrograde. See, RX right there. So that means it's officially gone retrograde. Now, what's interesting is we keep going around. Now, I'm going to put it back at the top of the chart just for clarity's sake. Watch. Now I'm going to go forward in daily increments. And you're going to notice that Mercury goes backwards and joins the sun. That's its occidental phase. And that's always probably the most crazy time. And you notice it goes through the sun, or what we call the eye of the sun. That's actually an ancient term called Cassimi, which is very important because Cassimi simply means that it is in the eye of the sun. And that actually happens in degrees of about 17 minutes of arc to the conjunction of the sun, which for all practical purposes will happen about 5:30, 5:45 a.m., actually about 5:15 a.m. on January 7th. You can see the dates up here. It's a little hard to follow, but it makes a lot of sense. See, it's at the same degree and minute of the sun. Then it goes into what we call the Oriental phase, meaning it's on the other side of the sun. And I'll put that back at the top of the chart, and you can actually see it elongating to the right of the sun, which means if you rotated it around, it would literally rise before the sun. That's what we call the Oriental phase. Oriental just simply is a fancy word that means it rises before the sun. So it becomes joining the ascendant first. So then it will continue to do that until about 6:12 a.m. on January, looks like 8th, yeah. So, no, what am I saying? 18th. Yeah, it'll go 18th. Until the 18th, right. So on the 18th, you'll see the S turn up again. And I'll put that back on the screen here where I can circle it. See the little S nomenclature right there? That means it's stationing again, appearing to slow down and stop in the sky, which it isn't. It's just Earth's orbit and also the Mercury's orbit that does it. See, it's like two cars on a freeway. When you have two cars going along and one's doing 55 and another one's doing 50, it looks like the other one's slowly going backwards, which it isn't. They're both moving. Right. And that's how the same analogy works. So basically, it'll go direct at about 6:12 a.m. Pacific time on the 18th. So that's the astronomy. And I just wanted to kind of go through that and show people how it works. So fun stuff. So here's the point that I want to make about this is the areas of life that I always say to be careful with is be careful with computers. It's a good time to back up your data. It's a great time to change oil, do maintenance, or be careful driving too. I notice a lot of accidents happen, especially out here in California, where people are driving as normal. Another way to think of Mercury retrograde, it's almost like the wind changes direction. It's very similar to that. And things tend to go backwards. In Vedic astrology, they actually say the planets get more powerful going backwards because they're going against the sign of the zodiac, which is, there's a lot of truth to that. So it's a time when it's not good to sign contracts. I always tell people in elections, if you can avoid closing on the house, if you can avoid the surgery, if it's elective, if you got to do it, you got to do it. But if you can avoid it, I always say, blame the professional, say my attorney's out of town, or I can't do it because of whatever. Just do whatever you got to do to delay it, because Mercury retrograde tends to get fouled up all the time. And I've seen it a ton of times. I have a quick story I want to tell. I had an astrologer friend of mine, really wonderful person, and she was getting married. And this is many years ago, and I don't want to mention who. But the bottom line is she was so excited. She goes, Jeff, I want to invite you guys to the wedding. So we went, and I got looking at the chart, and I went, wait a minute. She's picking Mercury as a signifactor, and it was trining Jupiter. And it looked like it was going to just go to a trine. That means happy love in a marriage. In a marriage election, the eastern-western horizon represents the two partners getting married. So after a while, I looked at it and I said, Mercury's going to go retrograde before, this aspect perfects. Well, what does that mean in plain English? Someone changes their mind. Well, the husband called me up and said, I can't believe it. She's in Europe, and she told me to get out of the house before she comes home. This was 2 months after they got married, if even that. And I went, okay, wow. Mercury retrograde.
Wow.
I've seen this 1,000 times.
Oh my goodness. Well, there's the overall energy of Mercury retrograde. And then there's how Mercury retrograde will affect each one of us individually and personally, right? And that all depends on where Mercury retrograde is happening in our chart.
So exactly right.
That's very, very interesting, because
very, very interesting.
We were talking about this last night, where Mercury retrograde is happening in your chart and in my chart, and what it represents for us. And it's not
the aspects
bad.
It makes, and the aspects,
and the aspects. And the aspects it's making. Right.
So it's not simple. I wish it were. Astrology is exceedingly complex. So one of the things that we find too is that Mercury does this sacred dance around the zodiac as it retrogrades 3 times a year. It'll do it sometimes in earth and fire signs. Like this one is actually happening in the tropical and in earth fire. So in the sidereal, it's actually doing the same thing. Actually, the tropical, I think it's earth. But it'll do this. It'll change elements of earth, air, fire, and water over periods of years. And it actually makes sacred geometry, almost like a Star of David, as it does it. In fact, all the planets do. I always say the solar system is a sacred matrix of the souls. Again, astronomers have really separated that into science only. And of course, astrologers have parted it's like a fork in the road that seemed to happen right about the Industrial Revolution, where science and the age of reason totally took a left turn, and of course the spiritual took a total right turn. And one of the things that kind of disturbs me about that is they need to be brought together a little bit more. And I think quantum physicists and many other of the new scientists actually do that. In fact, I'm going to put a clip of Claude Swanson on. He passed away, and I really love Claude, and I have a little clip I want to play of him.
Astrology is one of those really difficult things for a hard scientist to understand. For a long, long time, I didn't believe that it was even possible to have astrology. It must be delusion, because the normal physics education teaches us about what are supposed to be the forces in the universe. And there's gravity, and there's electromagnetism, and there's a strong and weak force. And all of those forces diminish with distance, so that except for gravity and electromagnetic forces, everything else is really just too weak. And so most physicists say, well, how can the planets have any effect at all on things that happen around us day to day? The gravitational force is extremely weak. The planets don't have a charge, therefore there can't be any effects. And that's the normal mainstream view of things. And I used to believe that for a long time. In the mid-'80s, I began realizing that there were some other things that go on in the universe besides those basic forces. in my book, The Synchronized Universe, talks about the paranormal.
So that's an interesting clip. You can see where Claude was just saying that the planets actually have torsional waves. Now that's, again, I'll look at more hard sciences, but when you get into the ancient world, like I was mentioning before, it's all angels and spirits and intelligences, which is interesting stuff. So not to get too far into that stuff right now, because I want to keep this practical towards a way you can use the practicality of Mercury retrograde. Most people today can get on the internet and they can look at their chart through AstroDeens and other websites. Or if you get a reading, I always love to mention to people what happens when Mercury goes retrograde in a given house. Right. So now watch, I'm going to put this up on the screen again. The first thing we'll do again is this chart. I'm just going to use it as an example. Each one of these little pie slices are what we call houses going around. So what you find here is the first house is personal. So if you have Mercury going retrograde in your first house, you're going to find it's a lot of personal stuff you got to deal with. That's just a generalized term, because the first house is the self, or your body and your daily routine. The second house is your money and resources. If it happens in your second house, a lot of people find they have to rearrange finances or the way they deal with their resources, because that's the second house. The third house is daily travel. I always find when people have Mercury retrograde in the third house, really watch your driving. Watch your driving and your neighbors, because the third house also rules neighbors. And also don't forget, the third house rules brothers and sisters and siblings. And I should also add, this is very simplistic on the house meanings, but it'll work. The fourth house is home, family, real estate. And also it can rule the father, or the main person running your family. So if it happens in the fourth house, you'll probably find the dishwasher breaks, or the plumbing screws up, or something goes on in your house that needs to be repaired or fixed, or something like that. If it happens in the fifth house, well, the fifth house is speculation. That's gambling and betting and stock markets. It's also your children. See, the fifth house rules all kinds of creative expressions. So it doesn't mean things are always going to go bad, but it means you're going to be dealing with those kinds of things, or your children may become having an issue, so on and so forth. The sixth house is health. If Mercury goes retrograde in the sixth house, you're likely to find that it could rule issues with your health that you want to retrace. Go to the doctor, get some blood tests, or do some work on the way your workout routines or your health is being treated, and diet too. The seventh house, partnerships and relationships of all kinds, whether you're married, in a relationship, or you got business partners, or whatever it is that you have, you're going to find the seventh house rules those areas of life. So it's all about partnerships. The eighth house is transformation. It also rules other people's resources. So the eighth house is always forcing you into change. Change of what? Maybe the way you deal with resources. It also may force you into changes at the way you are handling money too. So it's very important. The ninth house is higher education and knowledge, and also spiritual wisdom. So again, these are general terms. There's much deeper terms. But in general, you'll find if Mercury goes retrograde in your ninth house, it could also deal with foreign travel. I always tell people, watch foreign travel when you got Mercury retrograde in the ninth house. Like if for some reason you had to go on a trip, you may find it gets rescheduled, or it gets delayed, or you can't get back in, whatever it is. Or you may find maybe if you're dealing with higher education, something has to be dealt with. If it's in the 10th house, it's career. The 10th house is always career. So you're going to find rearrangements either with the job or your business, or something with the way you comport out to the world, your expression of your career. Mercury retrograde makes you always review, retrace, and rework. If it's in the 11th house, that's friends, groups, organizations. So you may find there's a big issue with a friend, or you want to review something with a friend or an organization, so on and so forth. If it happens in the 12th house, the 12th house is a very interesting chart. It's the final house. It always rules hidden things. Could be secret enemies. It also could be deep psychological issues that you want to review. Good time to go for therapy, counseling. Also, a good time to review many of the hidden things you've had swept under the table for a long time that you've been meaning to deal with. That could be anything from cleaning the garage to cleaning out some of the stuff that you've been harboring psychologically or, in a hidden way, and bring it out into the open. So that's just a really brief way to look at Mercury retrograde in all the houses. And there's actually a much, much deeper way to look at that. And you really need an astrologer for that, because you have to look at your outer transits. You also should look at the Vedic influences, and most importantly, the aspects that Mercury makes in the house that it's in to the other houses while it's going retrograde. So it's not simple, and life isn't simple, but that's a real basic way of looking at how you can look at Mercury retrograde.
Yeah, just getting a little taste of Mercury retrograde. And it's always to remember that these planets are energy. It's all about energy. How do you connect to the energy and understand the energy so that you can work with it, right? Instead of it just almost pouncing on you and you don't know what to do, or you feel out of sorts. Understanding the energy is so helpful.
It is. It really is. That's right. It's again, I think, when you look at astrology as a tool rather than some superstition. I mean, astronomy is astronomy. It's happening in the sky. And to negate it and call it the work of the devil, I don't think is a really good idea. I don't think we should over rely on anything, but, to treat it as an energy, just like in science and physics, I think it's a wise idea, because it is an energy and it does matter, and you can prevent things from happening, safety, you can avoid trouble, etc. So I know I've done things in my life out of expediency, and I've looked back and said, geez, why did I do that? Because such and such aspects were there. And we all do that, but it's really behooves you to look at it. And I've gotten to the point lately that probably last several years, I just really look at the chart explicitly, because when you kind of leave it to happenstance, you say, oh, it's not going to matter. That person isn't going to do this or that. They usually do. Usually do.
Right. Well, when we were talking yesterday about Mercury retrograde, you had mentioned that it's stationing into a conjunction of Venus.
That's right.
This time around. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. See, that's why I love having you there, because you always pull it in. So Mercury this time around, there's a lot of ways to look at this. Mercury is actually stationing, meaning stopping right into a conjunction of Venus, which is actually really positive. I like that. The other thing to look at, which is really fascinating, is the lunar mansions. The lunar mansions in Vedic astrology are actually stunning, because that gets back into the old Dravidian and Tamil and the old Sanskrit stuff that is absolutely amazing. Because again, I really believe the Aramaic and the Hebrew and the ancient worlds were very into the numerology of the celestial influences and angels that went together. And this particular one is actually happening in two lunar mansions. The first, it actually stations in something called Uttara Ashadra, which is a strange word for the lunar mansion. In fact, here, I'm going to put that on the screen just so people get kind of a concept for what I'm talking about, because this is astronomy. So here you can see, this is the Earth in the middle, obviously, and here is the moon. Now, there's 27 lunar mansions are what is shown here. And what's really important about these 27 lunar mansions is that the moon passes through that every month. And guess what? The Earth rotates through it every single day. So this is a very interesting, and I always joke around with the astronomers. I don't care how much they polish the lenses on their telescopes, they're not going to see this zodiac either, because it's a spiritual construct which doesn't physically exist. It exists on what we would call the etheric astral plane. It's a spiritual construct. So, and I have to say, my opinion is it really, truly is there. So I know there's a lot of things about the moon that people have speculated. It's a satellite that was put there, all that. I can just tell you this, the moon is really a sacred co-mixer of all the energies of not only the fixed stars, but also the planets as they focus their energy on the earth. You can almost look at this as rays of energy impinging upon the earth that are constantly intermixing with all the aspects of the planets and the motions of the moon and the fixed stars. Very, very complex. So when a planet goes retrograde, like Mercury, it's really important where it goes retrograde. So you can actually see right here, I'm going to put a little circle around that so you can actually see it. So you can see right here, this is a nakshatra, or what we call lunar mansion. Nakshatra, by the way, is synonymous with the word lunar mansion. So what's important here is it's going retrograde right there. It's actually going to move from this Earth sign of Capricorn into the fire sign of Sagittarius during the whole period. See, during that whole period, it's going to traverse about this whole area right here as it goes retrograde, conjuncts the sun, not that sun. That's a zodiacal indicator, and then goes backwards, like I showed you before. So this is very powerful because the earth signs tend to have a practicality to them where you don't want to vary. But the minute it crosses into fire signs, now when does it do that? It does it on January 7th. I'm not showing that on the screen here. It does it on January 7th. So, and then of course we know that it's going to, actually no, January 4th. I said that wrong. On January 4th, it's going to join the next nakshatra back, which is pronounced Purva Ashadra. And many people do pronounce these differently, but these are definitely a foreign language to us English speakers. But what does it mean in plain English? Well, it hits fire. It means this becomes a very activating Mercury retrograde. A lot of ideas, a lot of jumbling up. So fire always brings action, right? Fire and air. So you apply them. So Mercury is such an interesting planet because if you look at the glyph of Mercury, it truly is the crescent of the moon over the sun and over the cross. So it's very, very powerful. So what I like about showing this is that the energies are really going to shift right around January 4th. Well, we'd expect that, right? It's a new year, but it's happening right during the new year, or right as the new year gets going. And then it will conjoin the sun on the 7th. Now, politically, what might that mean? Well, I just happened to put up here the good old chart of the USA, right? And notice here, folks, I'm going to go to real time. This is the United States birth chart on the inner wheel. And notice Mercury here in the sign of Capricorn. This is the United States birth chart in the inner box. The outer box is the transits. So if I go backwards here, what you're going to find, watch, I go one day back, you see Mercury, little RX next to it. And then we keep going forward. Notice it jumps back in the Sagittarius, the sidereal Sagittarius, right on the 30th of December. But the lunar mansion changes on January 4th. So this is going to be a very dynamic Mercury retrograde for the country. And do we need astrology to tell us that? Look what all the Twitter dumps are doing. All the fire with the COVID exposures and the doctors now coming back online who have been suppressed. Many of the exposures being brought out about what had happened with the collusion of many government agencies in the Twitter, infrastructure that was all going on during 2020. So very interesting stuff. So we're likely to find, and I had mentioned this before, that 2023, particularly in January forward, is going to bring a lot of rehashing, retracing, and a lot of fire to the, you could say, issues that are at hand. And you can see Mercury is also in the fire trine, aspecting the United States, Mars, Mercury, Sun, and Jupiter. So this is going to be interesting. This Mercury retrograde is going to bring to fore a lot of things that haven't been brought to fore for a long, long time because of the other aspects that are going on right now. And remember, on January 17th, the day before Mercury goes direct, what happens? Let me run it forward here. See, this is why you can never take just Mercury retrograde. You got to look at everybody else co-mixing with it. On the 17th, Saturn goes right over the United States moon while Mercury is stationing and getting ready to go direct. So as we had said in a previous podcast on the 223 forecast, we are about to see some crazy stuff. And folks, what I didn't mention is Mars is retrograde also And that's going to go direct when? Right about the 11th and 12th of January. In fact, you can see here, you can see the date is right here, January 11th. And I can put a little circle around that just so you can see it, just so anybody who's watching this, you can see where I'm talking. Well, Mars right there is retrograde in the United States Earth trine. And as we go forward to what? The 12th of January, bingo, notice the little RX disappears right there and Mars goes direct. So expect this Mercury retrograde to be pretty intense because Mars is also stationing as Mercury is stationing. This is a real cocktail here for a lot of stuff. And don't be surprised if we see unprecedented things going on this Mercury retrograde, because it is coinciding not only with a lot of political events and worldly events that are going on right now, including the war in Ukraine and Putin and everything else that's brewing, but we're also seeing it happen right at a time when the United States itself is literally just cooking with energy. As I said, this is going to be one of the most, I think, intense, transformative next 2 years this country has ever seen, ever. And this Mercury retrograde really relates to it because we've got, look at the House is changing in the Senate and Congress, or I should say in the Congress. And this is very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. Expect I think a real intense time here.
Yeah.
It's very strong.
Yeah. Well, you're addressing the question that we had come through, which was basically the question is, Mercury is going retrograde at the end of December. How will that play into the energies of 2023?
You bet. And that's what I was just saying.
Yeah.
Remember, on our last podcast, I had mentioned, see, there's something known as solar arcs or primary directions. They're incredibly predictive in astrology. Again, like I said, we used to do this with stock options, and it's amazing. The United States this year, this summer, late fall in September, has primary directed Mars conjuncting the moon. What does that mean in plain English? Well, the moon is the general populace or the general public, if you will. And with Mars, I don't think we need to go over too much that Mars is the planet of war and aggression and intensity. And I think this Mercury retrograde is setting up a lot of very, very powerful events that are going to happen. And I think we're going to see some very powerful things cut loose here this January that are going to have effects on this next couple of years that are really intense. And I would say financially, I hope I'm wrong about this, but I think we're going to keep seeing economic issues spiral down. Unless they change the supply chains and start changing fuel costs, I think they're going to raise fuel. My opinion is, based on the astrology, I think that there's some outright intentional causations to bring the economy to its knees. That's what it looks like to me.
It certainly seems like we've been headed in that direction for some time now.
Many economists feel the same way. Well, I mean, it's totally logical when you think about you can't thwart energy, the backbone of the economy and the supply chains to everything, and then expect it to do well, especially after the whole COVID scandal,
Right. Well, what are some things we should do during Mercury retrograde that are positive, that would be beneficial to us during that time?
I always love to do maintenance on vehicles, to do backups on your computers, to clean, to rearrange, to redo, to rethink, replan. These are, it's all about redoing something or retracing or rethinking. So it's great to do all those kinds of things because Mercury going retrograde, you can't stop it, but it's like the art of war. You figure out, hey, how can I use this to my advantage? Well, it's a really good idea to back up your computers and go slower. Don't rush. If you're driving, make sure you look both ways at least twice. Slow down. This is a time, and I've seen it on the freeway, and boy, we see some accidents here in California, and they are wicked. I mean, there's just shrapnel everywhere when these cars are doing 90 miles an hour and crash into each other. And I always find accidents are more prevalent during Mercury retrograde. Why? Because people find the energy just kind of reverses. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I've had, again, that story I told you about the marriage. People change their mind. They rethink, they retrace. So if you become aware of that, you put that to your advantage rather than to being at the effect of a mistake of it. Right.
Yeah, that's the smart way to deal with all of these energies. We were saying earlier that the planets are energies, different energies. And once we understand them, truly understand them, then it's kind of like you just work with them best you can. Best they'll let you work with them.
It's just energy. It's energy. You know, I mean, I loved when I had the opportunity to teach a physics class, and it was so fun to look at energy from acoustics and from musical instruments and just, electrical energies and electronics and sound and light and all that. It's really a fascinating viewpoint of everything's energy. Well, what's really interesting is this nakshatra, meaning that lunar mansion I pointed out before, that Mercury retrogrades back into, has a lot to do with the brain. That particular nakshatra, it's I forget the name of it here because I always have to remember these, but it's, what is it here? It is Pura Ashadra. One of the attributes of it is it affects brain cells. So isn't that interesting? This is a great time to slow down and rethink. It can be stimulating to that. See, especially because Mercury is in that fire sign sidereally, and it's excited by that nakshatra. So it's a great time to really think about things and retrace your steps, strategize. Really good. And again, backup computers, anything that needs maintenance, now's a great time to do it. I always love that. Change the oil in the car. Whatever needs maintenance in the house, fix it. And if you don't, earmark it to fix it, because people often find things break during Mercury retrograde or they get all fouled up.
Yeah.
So why not be just attentive to things and it's usually things that have been let go. It's usually something that's, worn out and ragtagged, and all of a sudden you go, oh my God, it broke. Well, yeah.
Right. Right.
Because we didn't fix it before. See, rethink, retrace, and rework.
Yeah. What's interesting is we were talking again yesterday about Mercury and the moon, and pointing out how Mercury is the second swiftest next to the moon, right?
It is.
It's so interesting because the symbol for Mercury is the running man, right? But when it's retrograde,
the messenger.
The messenger, right?
Yeah, FTD floors use that. The messenger running, swiftness.
Yeah, that's right. But when it's retrograde, you can almost feel like, whoa, I need to slow down a bit. I just need to slow down and just take it all in and be
careful driving.
Yeah.
I mean, be careful driving. I always say this is
crossing the street as well. That's a big one.
Check the air pressure in your tires. Great time to go to Jiffy Lube and get them to check all the tires, get them to check all the oils and the fluids and look everything over, the belts on your car, whatever kind of car you drive, Of course, if you got a Tesla, it'll tell you in the computer. But the bottom line is, it's a great time to pay close attention to the maintenance of things.
Right.
And back up your computers. Computers are completely ruled by Mercury retrograde. So it's a great time to take that extra hard drive and do all your data backups, because as we know today, it is really a problem. And of course, if you use iCloud, great, then you're okay there. But it's a great time to back stuff up.
Right. Right. And which gemstone rules Mercury again? Is it emerald?
Emerald. Right. Yeah. Wearing emerald is really good. I find gemstones are amazing to center oneself. Yeah, emerald is an amazing gem to wear because the vibratory crystalline nature of emerald resonates with Mercury. Now, you can wear substitute gems that are nowhere near as powerful, but you can use green tourmaline is fine.
Right.
And garnet, that's fine. But I would tell you that the emerald is the way to go. And, there's emeralds that are very inexpensive. I have emeralds that are really
natural ones. So
natural
important
ones.
that they're natural.
That's the key.
Untreated. Yeah.
Because everybody jumps on the internet and you will always find cheap deals, which is fine. But many of these emeralds are lab grown and they're getting so sophisticated and they're beautiful. They look absolutely exquisite. And I actually have testing capability to test gems. And I can tell you that, a lab-grown gem will come back looking like it's natural. So they're getting very sophisticated at it, and it uses the same materials. The problem is it's in the cooling and the way it's formed, the angelic forces that are involved, I believe, in the creation of these minerals are quite interesting. And, that kind of relates to what you were saying before about the moon is the fastest body in the solar system. The Mercury's the second. And it's very interesting how the moon seems to have this magical alchemical ability to blend with Mercury, spirit manifesting on the earth. And I love perusing some of the ancient documents that come out of India. The ancient Hebrew text too, the Sefer Ratziel, which is from the Archangel Ratziel, talks about this stuff where literally the planets and all the angels in it and the exceedingly complex arrangements of the aspects in the lunar mansions all ray down onto the earth and influence things. Like we just had this very erratic, severe weather. Well, Mercury and Venus were together. Venus is the opening of the gates. It often brings a lot of moistures and rains, and Mercury is stationing into it. See? Look at all the rain we've had across the country, across the world.
Yeah.
Some very severe weather. So weather is, I'm always amazed at the ancient texts, how the ancients knew a lot about this stuff, and more than they should have. And I believe it was communicated by angels. I really do.
Well, I've got on my emerald.
All right. Good for you.
So to protect me, let this be a good Mercury retrograde.
They're
for
amazing.
everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, for everyone. Well, thank you, Jeff, so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening in. Please remember to ask your questions, leave your comments, and we'll address them all. And Happy New Year. Gosh, we're rolling into 2023 any day now. So Happy New Year. Wishing everyone so many blessings.
You bet. Happy New Year, and thanks for listening.